reason and one reason only: to honor our true heroes, the Vietnam War veterans. Today we're gathered to highlight the service of the armed forces during the Vietnam War and to thank you and honor our veterans who served during that time. 58,220, a number none of us will forget. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese also passed away. Last night I was sitting at the Winter Springs City Council meeting, listening to a story of a brave young police officer who was getting Saving a Life medal, and he was being awarded and recognized by his community less than 30 days, and he deserved it. But it made me think about you and what I was going to say. Our Vietnam veterans are truly the greatest generation of patriots this country has seen. You answered the call of duty of your country, yet you came home to be treated in a deplorable manner. On behalf of my fellow veterans, VFW Post 8207, our local community, and a more thankful nation today, we thank you for all you have done, and we are forever sorry for how you were treated. This morning you will hear from the United States Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, Colonel Joe Ramos, the Senior Advisor to the Director of the Vietnam War Commemoration and the United States Department of Defense.
My name is Joe, and I am the Senior Advisor for our Director in our office. Our office is charged with executing the Department of Defense's plan to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. In 2008, the Secretary of Defense was authorized by law to conduct a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. The inaugural event occurred at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, commonly known as the Wall, in Washington, D.C. on Memorial Day 2012. The President was the keynote speaker, and his words were powerful. He stated, and I quote, "And one of the most painful chapters in our history was Vietnam, particularly how we treated our troops who served there. We were often blamed for a war you didn't start, when you should have been commended for serving your country with valor. You were sometimes blamed for the misdeeds of a few, when the honorable service of the many should have been praised. You came home and sometimes were denigrated, when you should have been celebrated. It was a national shame, a disgrace that should not have happened. And that's why here today, we resolve that it will never happen again," unquote. 58,318 names are on the wall. The average age is 23.1 years old. 1,594 are still considered missing in action, and their families will wait for their fate. 54 of those that were unaccounted for from the state of Florida. 1,900 names on the wall are from Florida, 14 are from Sanford, 93 are from Orlando, and 1 was from Longwood. 8 women are on the wall. 31 sets of brothers, 3 sets of fathers and sons are also listed. At 63 years old, Wayne McGriff is the oldest service member from the Navy. And at 15 years old, Marine Private First Class Dan Bullock is the youngest American service member killed in action during the Vietnam War. Due to the wonderful efforts of our dedicated partners, to include 14 partners that are in Florida's 7th District, as well as Congresswoman Murphy's office, we intend to offer thanks from our nation to as many as possible of the 7 million living Vietnam veterans and the 9 million families of those who have served from November 1st, 1955 to May 15th, 1975.
And we saw it clearly after World War II, when the heroes of Normandy Beach and Iwo Jima were welcomed home by a grateful nation, which celebrated their victories and venerated their sacrifices. And thankfully, we witnessed it again in the years since 9/11. By and large, men and women who served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones are shown respect and even reverence by the American public, which is precisely as it should be. But too often, the treatment of Vietnam veterans represented a deviation from this tradition. In retrospect, it seems clear that some members of the public who doubted the wisdom of America's involvement in Vietnam did not properly distinguish between the war itself and the warriors who volunteered or were drafted to serve in the war. As a result, too many of you and your fellow service members were treated in dishonorable ways you did not deserve. And this ceremony, belated though it may be, is designed as a corrective, an effort to make sure you know how much your service and sacrifice was appreciated and is appreciated. No politics, no debates about foreign policy, just a simple expression of gratitude for men and women who put it all on the line when their country called, and who, once their time in service was over, fought so hard to make sure that veterans of their generation and future generations would be treated in a fair and dignified manner. And now, in order to explain why this ceremony means so much to me personally, I'd like to tell you a short story, probably one that you've heard before. But I was born in Vietnam after the Vietnam War had ended. And as you know, a communist government had taken power. And it was determined to punish those who had worked alongside the US military or the South Vietnamese forces. And my parents fell into both of those categories. And when I was just a baby and my brother was 8, my mom and dad concluded that a difficult situation had become intolerable. And they wanted us to live in a place where we would be safe, where we would have freedom and dignity, and where we would have the opportunity for a better life. And they didn't think any of that was possible any longer in Vietnam. And so we fled Vietnam in a small boat in the dead of night with other families. And several days into our journey, we ran out of fuel, and we were dangerously adrift in the middle of the South China Sea. Thanks to grace or good fortune, a US Navy ship patrolling in the area received our distress signal and located our boat. The sailors on board, all of them trained for combat, showed compassion for desperate strangers. They gave us the fuel and supplies we needed to reach a Malaysian refugee camp. And from there, we would make the passage to the United States and eventually become very proud American citizens. And now, decades later, I stand in front of you as the first Vietnamese American woman ever elected to Congress. The moment the US Navy rescued my family was the moment that made the rest of my life possible. And although I was too young to realize it at the time, this was also my introduction to America's uniquely wonderful combination of power and generosity, which is perhaps best embodied by the American military. A force for good in a chaotic and often cruel world. And as you can imagine, when I meet veterans, and especially Vietnam veterans like you, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I felt it last year when I had the privilege to travel to Vietnam with the late and great senior Senator John McCain, and to tour the prison where he showed so much courage and character, and demonstrated what it means to be a patriot. There's simply no words I can say to adequately thank you, and no actions I can take to fully repay the debt of gratitude I owe you and this country. But I promise you, I'll never stop trying.